You're listening to Crime Uncovered.
Welcome to Crime Uncovered. I'm your host, Sam Britt. Crime Uncovered is a podcast all about crime. I will tackle the most compelling and newsworthy events happening in the criminal justice system and have guests each show to give their take on what's going on in their field.
On this episode of Crime Uncovered, we are joined with newsworthy, former crime scene investigator and police officer.
You pronounced that right. That was
okay. Good. Awesome.
Chernobyl. And I was a police officer at Prince William County Police Department, and I was a crime scene technician for about three and a half years. So it's a stint you do while you're a police officer as well.
Okay, great. Awesome. That's good to hear. So after having a career in crime scene investigation and seeing many disturbing, unfortunate cases, to what extent are the infamous shows like CSI, Bones, Criminal Minds, similar to the real world, if they are at all?
It's a great question. So there's some of the things that we get in this field that our students get to see these shows and they get addicted to it. But in the real life, most of the times, the turnaround time when you process evidence or you request a response time or a certificate for a drug substance that you requested for, it takes weeks. But in shows like that, we see you get a turnaround time within a couple of minutes.
Right.
Those are the inaccuracies of the crime scene shows. So things like some of the high technology that you see on TV, you don't have some of those things at all in the crime scene themselves. And it's evolving to a point. It's getting to a point where you have like Crime 360 now. You respond to a scene. It's like a camera that scans the entire scene into a 3D model. So we just take 2D pictures, two-dimensional pictures. But 3D Crime 360 just takes an entire picture. So it freezes the frame, the crime scene the way it is. So we can go back and look at it and say, okay, this is a 3D version. This is basically what happened after the incident happened. So it gives us that realistic look of things. But there are several inaccuracies between a real crime scene and those CSI shows. And I used to watch shows like that, but I couldn't get past the first episode because I've done the real thing, and I just can't get past how some of those inaccuracies are. And there's a concept called the CSI effect. It's when we think what we see on Hollywood and social media about crimes, that's how we work in the real world, but it's not.
Okay. All right. Well, that's good to hear. I'm definitely a fan of some of those shows, but well,
good. They're good shows.
Sure.
The interest. So, and I got in this field, thankfully to shows like that. Yeah. Because that's why we tend to teach the real thing, because those shows get us the interest in the participants that we're looking for.
Right. Cool. Well, you were involved in, some heavy hitting cases and crime scenes in your career.
Yes, sir.
Can this take a toll on the human being? Just being in that field, seeing, the things that you see, can that really take a toll on the body?
Yes, it can. So most of the folks that I worked with at the CSI because for us, we call it crime scene technician. So it's you're a police officer, you get sent to train, and then you come back, you're a regular police officer, and then you work they call you to work specialized crime scene. And then we have specialized units that we'll call the crime scene analysts. So that's their full-time job. That's all they do. So I had a little bit of break for me. Mm-hmm. I'll only be called out if I'm working. I wouldn't be called out when I'm off. So if I'm working, the crime scene would come on, they would say, hey, we need a CST, crime scene technician, to come out. So I'll go out there and work it. So it does take a toll on you. For me, it was working cases with young children. And I did not like working young children's cases at all. I didn't have I believe we had just got married when I was selected to go to CSI or CST school. And so I worked it for a couple of years. And then when my son was born, he was a couple of months old. And then when I was working crime scenes with babies, I would just come home and just hold him real tight. I became overprotective over him, and I started thinking that things would happen to him. So for me, I didn't want to do that anymore. So I did only 3 years as a CST. And I've seen folks who've done it 5, 10 years. Most times they would try to do within 3 to 5 years and then switch to somewhere else. But again, don't let it. There's some inaccuracies to the thing like, CSI or CST is all about dead bodies and gruesome scenes. No, there are other parts of being a CST too, like fingerprinting. You can do blood spatter, or you can do other type of analysis, and you can work in the drug aspect, or you can work in the fingerprinting aspect, or you can work in the evidence collection, or you can work in the lab side of it, or the recovery evidence. So there are various types. So you don't always have to work like the death scenes or like the gruesome scenes. So some folks just move around within that same field. So, but it can take a toll on you, and it makes you become a little bit less emotional to things. For example, my wife and I were driving several years ago, and there was an accident happened right in front of us, and you can see things all over the place. And I looked over, and she was crying her eyes out, and I just jumped out of the car. I was off duty. I just jumped out and got right into action and looked at if there's any survivors, and then assessed them, and then called 911, and then start giving the updates on the phone. So I jumped straight into survival mode, and then I was working the case. So whereas she was crying, and so you tend to see things like that when you are part of that so long.
Okay. Wow. Yeah, I was just about to ask, what kind of things were hardest for you to move on from and try to forget? It was the children's cases. And
it was yes, it was children's cases, and it's just dealing with adults. I worked several suicide cases. I worked several cases where accidents and suicides, murder cases, and things like that. And I would go about my business, but with a baby or a small child, let's say I worked this 7 to 5 p.m. shift. So let's say I came on at 7, and then I get a CST call around like 8:30. Sometimes I come in early, like 6 o'clock, because we had the early unit shift. So I would come in around 6 something, and let's say I get a case around like 6:30, 7 o'clock, and I would work that case till about 10:30, 11. I would probably take the rest of the day off because if it's a child, and sometimes I would just mope around all day, and I would just go back to the station, and I would want to write my report. I would take time to just sit there and just think about how this child has not had that much to live, and then now they're gone, and they've only a couple of months old, they've only a couple of years old. I've had cases where parents were arguing, and they would set the child down to sleep and thinking that everything is fine, and they wake up the next morning, the child is just blue, and there's blood coming out of the mouth, and they are just devastated. So those things really took a toll on me. And those are one of the hardest ones that I dealt with. But again, you build the resilience for things like that, and then you just do it.
Okay. You've discussed how some investigators' tenure in this field is almost always short-lived in a way, and you've discussed some reasons for that. But what are some reasons for staying? And also what are some reasons for leaving this profession?
So again, for leaving is you want to diversify yourself. You don't want to do that for the rest of your life, and you want to do it 3 to 5 years, and then move within that same department. If you were CSA, crime scene analyst, you can ask to be reassigned different section, like dealing with ballistics, which is just firearms, and you're dealing with, and they will teach you how to deal with ballistics. So, or you can deal with blood spatter. Then again, that will take you back into the crime scene. Or you can do fingerprint analysis, where you basically just get fingerprints, and all you do is compare them, run them through the database, or you can do evidence collection, where you just collect evidential materials, or you can do evidence processing. Like folks collect them, bring them to you, you categorize them, and you store them, and you give them barcode scanners and things like that. And so there are various things you can do if you stay within that field. And so to answer your question, you can stay because it's a diversified field. It's a pretty evolving field. It's a pretty rewarding field, where I say you are representing those who can't speak anymore, who are dead and gone. So the work you do is helping them speak. It's helping them tell their case, helping them, helping folks to understand why they were murdered, or why they were killed, or why they're dead and gone.
So can you give some advice to those who want to pursue this career, and maybe some insight to what exactly they'd be doing for such an extensive occupation?
Yeah, definitely. So there's 2 ways to get into this field, and either the SWAN section, which is a police officer section, or the non-SWAN. So SWAN is the easiest. So you either become a police officer, and then after 2 years you ask to go to crime scene school, or you can volunteer to go to crime scene school. So most times they look at folks who go out of the box or think outside the box. Like as a regular police officer, you take pictures and you ask questions, you educate yourself, you read books, and so when you go to a crime scene, you don't just do what a regular police officer does. You just like take pick the regular pictures, you dust for a little bit of fingerprints, and then write a report and leave.
Mhm.
So you take extra pictures. You look for things that the regular person wouldn't see. Like you move things around and you scrape things out to see if there's anything hidden behind. So once you do that, and then CSI school opens up, you ask to go. They will ask, why should we sponsor you to go? And then you prove to them that I have an interest in going. Then you would, excuse me, then you will become a CSI after you go to the school and then you certify. You come back. Easiest way. Another way is the non-sworn part. So large agencies are opening it up to civilians now. So you have to bring something to the table. So I would advise folks to go out, get certifications online. They have online schools now that you can take sort of CSI certifications and get a master's degree or a bachelor's degree in criminal justice, criminology. Coupled with that, you can apply for those jobs because you're competing with retired police officers or you're competing with regular police officers who want to be civilians now and they're taking over those jobs. So
Mhm.
you have to bring something to the table. So I would advise educate yourself, read outside the box, and think outside the box. Read a lot, and then just apply it for those big police departments. They are opening them up to civilians, and so folks can do that. The insights that you can take, you can get from this kind of work, job for the prolonged period of time is just being vigilant and then just diversify yourself, like how I mentioned earlier on. Just try to do various things within the unit because you've got blood spatter
Okay.
and you've got crime analysis and then you've got ballistics and you've got crime scene evidence collection and then you have various things within that. So you're not just always working like blood, guts, and murder and things like
Yeah.
that. So you
Yeah.
can go outside of that box. So
Okay.
again, there's a lot of things that you can do within this field.
Okay. Great. So on the show, we do an activity segment
Yes,
every
yes.
episode, and for this particular one, I'm going to give you a crime scene, and you
Okay,
walk me through step by step
okay,
of your report and break it down so our audience can be in the moment.
okay,
So here's your crime scene. You arrive at a mansion. There's a
okay,
couple of cars in the driveway,
okay,
and all are very luxury vehicles. You arrive at the front door of the house, and it's cracked open.
okay,
And as you walk in, you see drops of blood on the nearest stairs and a
okay,
gun by one of the cars
okay,
outside. After entering, you see a large man deceased on the living room floor.
okay,
The entire house is completely trashed.
okay,
The house is dim, but some lights are on, and it's around 1:30 in the morning.
okay.
What do you do first, investigator Worry?
Okay, so there's two things to take into consideration here. So one is when if I'm responding as the investigator itself, I have to assume a certain role. If I'm responding as a first responder officer, I want to make sure the scene is secure. So I'm responding as the investigator, crime scene investigator. I'm one of the major personnel on the scene. Crime scene investigator, or CST, CSA, CSI, whichever they call it. And then you got the police officer who responds there first. So as the CSI, I would find who the police officer is first. I responded to say, hey, let's secure the scene. Make sure the scene is secure. It's the first step I always take. Scene is secure and ensure that there's no life or like there's no first aid that we have to render. But the first responder, I've already done that.
Okay.
As an investigator, when I respond, I know the person is already deceased. So I'll focus on securing the scene. How you secure the scene is by ensuring that no one comes in or out, post someone at the front door. And since we have a gun laying outside, I would extend the perimeter out more. So I would have officers at the gate. If it's a mansion that's gated, I would post someone at the gate. And then if the mansion is bigger and there's other mansions around too, I would just post outside to say, don't let anybody in the fence. And then we'll come in. Once you ensure that the scene is secure, you start a scene security log. Who's coming in and out of the scene should sign that log. You can post an officer at the door to take that notes or take down names of who's coming in and out. After you secure the scene, and then you go into the actual document the scene. Document the scene is you can start with a walkthrough with the first officer that responds. Say, hey, let's walk through. Tell me what you saw, what you noticed, what you've done, what you've touched. Anything out of place do the walkthrough. That walkthrough is one of the first steps of documenting the scene. So, and then you start taking notes while you're doing the walkthrough, and then after you take notes, and then you start photographing things because the photograph preserves the items in place. because
Okay.
sometimes you may push things around to look. So the first thing before you touch anything, start taking pictures and document the entire scene by taking pictures. And then some folks who do a recorder, or some folks who do a video recording, and then they'll record the entire scene. Or some folks who use that Crime 360 technology I was telling you about.
Yeah.
It sits on a tripod, and then it will just turn it on, and it scans the entire room. So
Okay.
that's your documenting right there. So after you document the scene, then you go down to actual collecting a collection of evidence. So in this case, we want to see. Actually, I'm going into too much, but you asked me what was the first thing to do. So I'll stop right there. I don't want to get too involved. So
No, you're fine. This is
all right,
great. Yeah, this is
okay. So
great.
just keep going.
Sure. Yeah. I
Okay,
mean, yeah.
all right. So
We're in too deep, Professor.
all right. So yeah, so you document the scene by taking notes, photos, and videos, and sometimes just using the Crime 360 app. And then after that, you start collecting the evidence, because we're trained, though, before you touch, move, or uh, disturb anything, you photograph it pretty good. So after you photograph it all, and then you start collecting the evidence, start tagging them, putting them in a brown bag or in a box or
Okay.
in something that you can actually seal, depending on what it is. Because if it's something that's soluble, you don't want to put it in a plastic container, because then if a condensation will form, and then it will start introducing foreign particles into it.
Okay.
So determine what you're collecting and where you're placing it. After everything has been collected, label them, markers, and then case number, your initials on them, and seal them. Place them into the bags, and then into the crime scene truck, and then send them. And then you follow the chain of custody. The chain of custody is just the events and times, and the evidence themselves from one place to another, and
Okay.
then until you get them to the. So as a CSI, that's your job. You make sure everything goes in order. Your job is not to figure out the happenstance, or to figure out what happened. Your job is to collect the evidence, make sure the evidence is there, because you present that evidence to the. Because at the scene you have first responder, which is the police officer, then you have the crime scene tech or analyst, or crime scene investigator, and then you have the criminal investigator, which is the detective. So everything you're doing is for the detective.
Okay.
So you would be working tandemly with the detective to see how are things going, and so you can document things pretty good, and then you pass all the information, and then lastly you write a report. So you write that report goes to the detective and the department, and then after you've done all that, then you determine to close the scene. So you
Okay.
don't just leave the scene and say, hey, I've collected all my scene, and just
Yeah.
leave this dead person here.
Yeah.
So you close the scene. How you close the scene, there are several steps. So either you contact the medical examiner's office to see, hey, are we transporting this to the medical ME's office, or are we releasing him back to the family? So, but in this case, since there was a deceased person and there was a gun outside, we, again, as CSI, it's not our job to say what happened. It's our job is to collect the evidence. So
Okay.
we would assume that something happened in this case, and then so we're not just going to leave it as is. So we'll collect every evidence, and there's evidence outside too, the cars. We'll document all that, take pictures of all that, collect the evidence outside itself, and check the vehicles if there's any fingerprint at all, collect all that, and then document all that, take pictures, photos, and notes, and then after all that, then we'll write a report, as I mentioned earlier, and then we close the scene. Closing the scene, this looks like a suspicious case, so we're not just going to leave it as that. So we'll hand it over to the detective. The detective would make the call to say when we take him to the medical examiner's office. And then after we're done with the scene, either we'll close the scene, like there's going to be follow up of us coming back there, so we'll kick everyone out, even the tenants of the house or the residents. We'll kick them all out, or if it's safe enough, we'll actually have them clean the scene cleanup. We'll have someone. There's people that out there that specialize in scene cleanup. They will come in and clean the entire
Okay.
scene. And so clean will be scene. We'll do a scene debrief. Notify the chain of command. Chain of command is it's just the notifying like your supervisors, the chief, the majors, the captains, just letting them know what happened. And then we'll debrief the scene to see if we'll change anything, if there's anything that I've changed. And then and then we'll close the scene. And also so we'll follow the chain, make sure the chain of custody is followed. And sometimes we'll do a final walkthrough as well to make sure that we didn't miss anything. And then we'll just release the scene back to the family. But in this case, since there's a suspicious nature, we'll be there for a while, long time,
Yeah.
and then once we have once we have cleared everything, then we can release it back to the family.
Great.
It's a little bit too much. It's not. It's
No.
not. Sometimes it's. I tend to do too much, and even when I did this, right now when I'm teaching it, when I was out there on the scene, I followed maybe 90% of this step or 80%
Okay.
of these steps.
Yeah.
But teaching it is a whole different.
Sure.
thing.
Yeah.
So you have to give 100% of it. But when you're actually doing it, it's probably 80 to 90% of the
Okay.
items that you get taught that you actually do on a crime scene.
Okay. Great.
Yes, sir.
Well, Mr. Roy, I really appreciate the interview.
No problem.
And
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
again, this is episode 1 of Crime
All right.
Uncovered. So thank you for joining me.
No problem. Yes,
And
sir.
yeah, and tune in next week.
All right.
All right.
Yep.
All
Thank
right.
you so much.
Thank you.
Well, if you don't believe me enough, here are some stats and some facts about our talk today. Over 40% of all crime scene investigators leave this profession within 4 years, according to Zippia. Employment of investigators could potentially increase 16% from 2020 to 2030. From work crime, forensic science was not invented by scientists, it was actually invented by the police. And from listening to our guest today, our conversation started with what to expect when going into an investigation and ended with the steps to solving a crime. What did you learn from this interview? I want to thank you for listening to Crime Uncovered, and don't forget to tune in next time.
You're listening to Crime Uncovered.